There is a place on the map where two continents almost touch. A strait of just over 700 meters separates Europe from Asia and joins the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. The geometry is absolute, a triangular peninsula embraced by strategic waters, the Bosphorus, the Sea of Marmara, and the natural harbor of the Golden Horn. This city has been besieged 23 times, and each time, armies from different empires marched to its walls with the same conviction that it would finally succumb. Almost every time, they were wrong. Its name changed, its rulers changed. Today, the world calls it Istanbul. But for 11 centuries it was Constantinople, a name that became synonymous with power, wealth, and the purest human ambition. What you are about to see has been constructed from fragments of reality, engravings, lithographs, and photographs from centuries-old archives. We have used artificial intelligence to transform these static records into windows into the past. This is not a definitive reconstruction, but a plausible interpretation, faithful to what has survived in the memory of the world. Here, history is the guide, and technology is our time machine. Fasten your seatbelts. The journey is about to begin. In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great made a decision that would alter the axis of civilization forever. He turned his back on the traditions of Rome because he saw what few dared to admit: the beating heart of the empire no longer beat in the west. His gaze was fixed on a precise point on the map, where the waters narrow until Europe almost touches Asia. It was a military and commercial position so perfect that it seemed impossible for it to exist by accident. The place already existed and was called Byzantium, a modest Greek city founded centuries before by settlers who had, according to legend, followed the instructions of an oracle. Where others saw only hills, he drew impenetrable walls. Where there were simple dwellings, he erected imperial palaces and monumental churches. In just 6 years of frantic construction, a new capital emerged from the peninsula, fed by colossal aqueducts and crowned by the immense Hippodrome. Officially, he named it New Rome. But the world, in reverence for its creator, eternalized it as Constantinople. Whoever dominated Constantinople dictated the pace of trade between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, capturing the essence of the Silk Road before it reached European markets. It was the only gateway through which armies could march between two continents. In the 17th century, the ancient Roman Hippodrome had been transformed into an open square. The Egyptian obelisk was still standing, exactly where Byzantine emperors had erected it centuries before. In the background, the minarets of the newly built Blue Mosque cut through the sky, a new power declaring its greatness, on the very ground where the previous power had declared its own. But go back 11 centuries in time, and you'll find the center of the world in its splendor. The Roman Hippodrome was a colossal arena, where 100,000 souls squeezed under the marble to watch chariot races that decided much more than trophies. They decided the fate of political factions and the lives of the emperors themselves. There, the emperor stood like a living god before a people who, in an instant, acclaimed him, and in the next, were capable of overthrowing him. The Theodosian Walls, erected in the 5th century, formed a barrier almost 7 kilometers long on the land side, protected by a deep moat and sentry towers every 50 meters. While the walls ensured security, the Valenti Aqueduct ensured life. Crossing the city above the rooftops, to supply hundreds of thousands of inhabitants with water brought from forests miles away. No assault force in antiquity or the Middle Ages had an answer to this brutal combination of Roman engineering and unwavering determination. The greatest test would come from the south. In 717 AD, an Arab fleet of over 2,000 ships sailed towards the Bosphorus. The Umayyad Caliphate was at its peak. It had conquered North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, and Persia. Constantinople was the ultimate prize. The city responded with a weapon the world had not yet seen, Greek fire, an incendiary substance that burned furiously over water and could not be extinguished. In one night of horror on the Bosphorus, the invading fleet was reduced to floating ashes. That day, Constantinople didn't just save itself. It acted as the unbreakable shield that prevented the fall of the entire European continent. In 1204 AD, Constantinople experienced absolute ruin. The fatal blow did not come from the Arab caliphates or the Persian Empire. It came from within the faith itself. The Fourth Crusade, financed by Venetian interests and driven by unpayable debts, diverted its fleet from the road to Jerusalem to the heart of the Bosphorus. What was supposed to be the shield of Christendom suddenly became its greatest trophy. For 3 days of horror, the Crusader knights sacked temples, desecrated altars, and turned 1,000 years of accumulated wealth into ashes and plunder. At that moment, the fate of the Byzantine Empire was sealed, not by an external enemy, but by a fratricidal ambition that the city would never be able to fully reverse. What was lost in those 3 days is impossible to calculate, and painful to try. Pope Innocent III was horrified to see that his own soldiers had desecrated the capital of the faith that they themselves were supposed to protect. Constantinople would regain its sovereignty decades later, but would return diminished, exhausted and deeply suspicious of the West. The sack of 1204 didn't destroy it immediately. It only made what was to follow inevitable. In the spring of 1453, Emperor Constantine XI Palaeologus knew what was coming. He knew that Western aid would not arrive. He knew that he had less than 10,000 men to defend a city that had once been home to 1 million inhabitants. From the top of Theodosian Walls, he watched the Bosphorus, the Ottoman ships multiplying on the horizon, Mehmed II's camp, stretching across the plain on the other side of the walls. A young sultan of 21 with an obsession and cannons that no wall had faced before. Constantine refused to surrender the city anyway. For 53 days, Mehmed's cannons hammered away at Theodosian Walls. Artillery pieces so large that they required 60 oxen to transport, capable of hurling half-done stones against structures that had withstood everything for 1,000 years. In the early hours of May 29th, the last defense gave way. The Ottoman soldiers entered through the breach. Constantine XI died fighting on the walls. His body has never been identified with certainty. Mehmed entered the city on horseback. He went straight to the Aya Sofia and ordered that it be converted into a mosque and not demolished. He forbade indiscriminate looting and declared himself heir to the Roman emperors. In the West, the news came as a physical shock. Constantinople had fallen. The world would no longer be the same. And the city that had withstood 23 sieges over 11 centuries was beginning a new life under a new name. Mehmed II didn't want a conquered city. He wanted an imperial capital. And for that, he built the Mosque of Suleiman, erected on the highest point of the city under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. Was the most eloquent statement of this ambition. Designed by the architect Mimar Sinan, its scale was monumental, domes upon domes. Minarets that pierced the sky, courtyards capable of holding thousands of worshippers. An affirmation of faith and power visible from all sides of the Bosphorus. At the center of it all, the Aya Sofia stood. A church for almost 1,000 years, and converted into a mosque by Mehmed II the day after the conquest. It was the living symbol of the transition of empires. Its Christian mosaics were carefully covered, not destroyed. Its Roman columns continued to support the same dome that had dominated the skyline since the 6th century. Few buildings in the world carry so many layers of history in every stone. The Aya Sofia didn't belong to any specific empire, it belonged to time. Below the surface, the city continued to function with the infrastructure that the Byzantines had built centuries before. The underground cisterns, dug in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian, sustained a population that was growing unstoppably. The Basilica Sistine, with its 336 Roman columns emerging from dark, silent waters, supplied the city above, without most of the inhabitants even knowing it existed. An entire world operating in the shadows, under the feet of a booming metropolis. At the port, ships arrived from all over the known world. Grelet's engraving from 1680 captures this pulse with precision. Ottoman galleys and sailing ships crowding the Golden Horn. The silhouette of the city punctuated by minarets and domes in the background. Spices from the Orient, textiles from Persia, wheat from the Black Sea, metals from Europe. The same port that had enriched Roman and Byzantine emperors was still the economic engine of a new empire. From the shipyards of the Golden Horn came the vessels that sustained Ottoman power in the Mediterranean. Constantinople had become Istanbul, but the logic that made it indispensable was exactly the same from the day Constantine chose it. From the heights of Aya, the Golden Horn was revealed in all its bucolic and bustling glory. Istanbul hadn't just survived the fall of Constantinople, it had flourished on top of it, layer by layer, stone by stone. But Constantinople wasn't just stone, water and power, it was, above all, people. If you were to walk through the streets of Constantinople in 1878, one of the first figures you would come across would be the hamal, the professional porter. Men who climbed up and down the city's steep hills with wooden frames on their backs, carrying burdens that weighed more than themselves. There weren't enough carts for the narrow streets. Flowers were not a luxury in Constantinople, they were a language. Specific bouquets communicated condolences, joy, respect or affection in ways that words sometimes failed to reach. The flower merchant moved between communities, between neighborhoods, between different religions, carrying in his hands something that everyone understood in the same way. Even under Ottoman rule, the Greek community maintained its churches, its schools and its language. They belonged to a city that was theirs and at the same time no longer was. The Greek ladies of Constantinople wore a mixture that could only have been born there: Byzantine influences in the embroidery, Ottoman cuts in the sleeves, European fabrics in color and texture. No other city in the world produced this kind of involuntary synthesis. The costume was the map of a story that no book could fully summarize. The Zabik was a figure that belonged to Anatolia's imagination as much as its roads. Warrior, dancer, brigand or hero, it depended on who was telling the story. His ornate clothes, with elaborate embroidery and wide pants, were as eloquent a statement of identity as any military uniform. The African presence in Constantinople was ancient and complex. Men and women from the African continent had inhabited the city for centuries, in roles that varied enormously, from trade to imperial administration, from domestic roles to prestigious positions at the Ottoman court. Constantinople was never a racially homogeneous city. It had always been a point of convergence for all the roots of the known world. The Jewish community in Constantinople had roots that predated the Ottoman Empire itself. After the expulsion from Spain in 1492, thousands of Sephardic Jews found refuge in the city at the invitation of Sultan Bayezid II himself, who is said to have said, according to tradition, that Christian kings impoverished their kingdoms by expelling such capable people. The Hebrew ghetto was a neighborhood with its own life, its own rhythm and its own memory. Synagogues, bakeries, schools and markets worked to a rhythm determined by the Jewish religious calendar, parallel and intertwined with the life of the surrounding city. The separation was cultural, not walled off. The streets of Constantinople in 1878 were filled with human types that no other city in the world could bring together with the same density. Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Africans, Europeans, each with their own dress, language, religion, all sharing the same space without this being considered extraordinary. The Grand Bazaar was the heart of it all. With more than 4,000 stores spread over 61 covered aisles. It was the largest closed market in the world and one of the oldest still in operation. The light filtered in through the stone vaults, creating an atmosphere that mixed dimness and brightness, colorful fabrics, polished metals, spices in piles. Negotiations took place in 40 languages. To enter the Grand Bazaar was to enter a world that operated by its own ancient and precise rules. Outside, the cafes functioned as informal parliaments. Men sat on low stools, hookahs lit, cups of Turkish coffee on tiny tables. Policies were discussed, rumors circulated, empires were analyzed by men who would never rule them. At the port's customs office, the pace was different, urgent, bureaucratic, multilingual. Boxes and bales arrived from places that most Europeans knew only from maps. The customs house was the real thermometer of the empire's health. When the ships arrived full, the city was breathing. When the port emptied, something was wrong in the world. On the opposite bank of the Bosphorus, Scutari, the modern Üsküdar, served as a constant reminder that this metropolis did not belong entirely to any one continent. To look at Scutari from within the walls was to contemplate the vastness of Asia. To look at Constantinople from Scutari was to glimpse the last bastion of Europe. And in the midst of this silent dialogue, the Bosphorus flowed indifferently, carrying ships, separating continents, uniting the world. Seen from the International Space Station at night, Istanbul pulses like a living organism. The lights outline the Bosphorus with surgical precision, Europe on one side, Asia on the other, the suspension bridges stitching the two continents into a single urban fabric of 15 million people. It's impossible to look at this image and not think about how many layers of civilization there are under those lights. 3 names, 23 sieges, 11 centuries of resistance. The city that everyone tried to swallow ended up absorbing everyone: conquerors, merchants, refugees, entire empires. And it's still here, in the same strait, looking at both sides of the world at the same time. Constantinople exists in the memory of the world. If this video has aroused your curiosity about the civilizations that shaped the world we know today, subscribe to the channel. Each new episode reconstructs an era that time has tried to erase. Let us know in the comments, which historic city would you like to see rebuilt by AI?